UFOs, black operations, fake moon landings, 9/11. Total penetration with Paula Gloria. Prepare to be penetrated.
Hi, this is Paula Gloria, and this show is going to be called Total Penetration.
You can totally penetrate Paula Gloria Monday, 7 p.m. on Howard 101.
Good morning. What we're going to be talking about today is what I've called the biggest game in town. My name is Walter Burian. I live in Prescott, Arizona. I became aware of something approximately 10 years ago, which changed my life. I'll give you a little analogy of how I learned about the complete financial takeover of the wealth of this country by composite government. Back in 1989, I lived in New Jersey. There was a governor by the name of Jim Florio who was running for office under a no new tax platform. He won, and as soon as he got into office, a $2.8 billion tax increase was enacted, the largest in the state's history. It's obvious that the public was not too thrilled about Mr. Florio's actions, and one of the local radio stations, 101.5 FM, started doing some rabble-rousing, taking calls from listeners on examples of waste and misspending in government. The first 2 days I was listening, and I heard people calling in with examples of 5,000, 15,000, 85,000 was the highest figure I heard. I pulled out the state of New Jersey's budget report, which is the only thing I was aware of at that time. They had $11 billion on budget, $6 billion off budget. The total annual service budget was $17 billion a year. I called into the show and I made the comment, come on guys, you're missing the whole point. The highest figure I heard was 85,000. The state's dealing with billions of dollars. I read off the figures. I said if there's fraud, waste, and misspending taking place on tunes of tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. The DJ at that time challenged us, the listeners, to start a tax protest organization to repeal the $2.8 billion tax increase. 10 of us got together the next day. I incorporated a group called Hands Across New Jersey. We scheduled our first rally 10 days out from that point, and basically, with the help of 101.5, we had 115,000 people converge on Trenton from all the shore points in New Jersey, effectively shutting the city down. Now, during the course of organizing that rally, I took over looking at the budget, revenue, and finance of the state. And I have been approximately, for about 15 years, I was a commodity trading advisor. I was one of the first tenants of the World Trade Center back in 1979. And large figures did not bother me. $100 million and $1, there was no difference. So when I started looking at the figures on the New Jersey budget report, as I mentioned, there were $11 billion on budget, $6 billion off budget. It showed a net available of $25.6 billion. But then I asked myself the number one question that IRS asks in an audit: what are the cash gross receipts? I started noticing the large cash cow groups in state government, the New Jersey Turnpike, Garden State Parkway, Port Authority, New York, New Jersey. The revenue was not inclusive in the budget report. I didn't see any large returns from investment funds on the budget report. And I said, they have to have two sets of books here. They're not accounting for the whole picture. The director of the budget at that time was an individual by the name of Richard Keevy. He was on vacation till the following Tuesday of that week. I found out who his lower assistant was, called in, and the conversation went just like this. I said, hi, this is Walter Burian. I'm working on a report for Richard. I have to have it done by Tuesday when he gets back from vacation. I need all the figures on the autonomous agency accounts, interest accounts, investment accounts. And the reply I got was, oh, you want the comprehensive annual financial report. Bing. First time I ever heard that before in my lifetime. Got it that Friday. Started crunching numbers. It showed total liquid investment funds of $188 billion. $188 billion. Of which common stock ownership, $70 billion. On loan to public and private corporations, $10 billion. Insurance company equity participation, $14 billion. On loan to public and private corporations, $10 billion. And I started looking for the total cash gross receipts, as I mentioned, what IRS would ask for in an audit. I found it on page 174. Now, this is 1989's Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. On page 174, under cash additions, all agencies, all departments, all sources. Here's a state with a declared service budget of $17 billion, who was bringing in $86,799 million in cash. I saw that figure and instantly realized the definition of syndicated organized crime. Here we had a representation to the public that the state of New Jersey was bringing in $17 billion, when in reality they were bringing in close to $86 billion. They had $188 billion in liquid investment funds. And I also learned the principle of operation that day. Anything that was a cost and an expense, traditional service side of the budget report, health and welfare, human services, motor vehicles, was left under the budgetary basis, and the public footed 100% of the bill for 100% of the services. Now, anything that was a profit center had the ability of being a profit center, large investment fund that generated tens and hundreds of millions of dollars, totally restricted by statute for no tie or inclusion whatsoever with the budgetary basis. Now, this is what I've called the biggest game in town. I saw it first in New Jersey, and I said the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. Here I am, a commodity trading advisor. I was doing a national news line coast to coast at the time. Never heard of the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. I wanted to find out why. I was mad. I mean, there was such a distinct difference between the revenue on the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report and the minuscule revenue that was shown now on the budgetary basis. I said, why did I did not see this on a newspaper, radio show, TV show? Now, the department that mailed out the report, the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, was from the Department of Treasury. I called the mailroom, and the mailroom usually doesn't get a call from the public, so they were very cooperative. I wanted to find out who the report was sent to. I thought it was a short list. They said, I'm sorry, sir, the list is too long. We can't read it to you on the phone. So I started qualifying. I found out it was sent to every editor of every paper on the East Coast. It was sent to the deans of all of the colleges. It was sent to the CEO and every one of the directors from ABC, CBS, NBC. When I verified that, I started smelling cooperative effort for non-disclosure. I then got the telephone number from ABC and NBC on where the report was sent to. I called, and the conversation went just like this. Hi, this is Walter Burien calling from the Department of Treasury. We've been sending you our Comprehensive Annual Financial Report for the last 14 years, and we're doing a logistical survey on how many other states are sending you their reports. Could you please tell me? ABC was getting it from 36 states, NBC was getting it from 34 states. When I heard that, now I'm getting very mad. I'm starting to see a clear-cut cooperative effort for non-disclosure on the most important information that exists in this country, period. The extent of the financial takeover of composite government of this country, the wealth of this country, with the cooperation of the syndicated media for non-disclosure.
What's this about?
Well, this is about the police being used to rob us of our rights as a tool to deny us of our right to grow and benefit from the cannabis plant, which we now know kills cancer cells. The actual concentrated THC kills cancer cells when ingested. But they will allow us to smoke it as a treatment because the pharmaceutical industry makes 80% of its profits from cancer treatment, and they will let us smoke our pot to overcome and to heal us from those horrible treatments, but they will not allow us to take the concentrated oil and grow it in our own backyard. It kills cancer and puts Alzheimer's in reverse and cures diabetes and a number of other ailments that they say are incurable. So we're saying we don't want Urgent to come to Woodstock. We don't want them to arrest anybody in our town. We actually support people's rights to grow this plant, and we encourage them to grow this plant, and we want the state of New York to stop using their police to arrest people for growing a plant that never hurt anybody, and they know it. That's why they decriminalized in 1977. That's why New York State was the first state to decriminalize, because as Mr. Gottfried, the Assembly Chair of the Health Committee, who was Coach Chair then, says, scientific evidence clearly shows no significant harm or no harm at all from marijuana use. And we happen to know that 3 years prior to that statement that he made in 1977, a report came out nationally that it shrinks tumors, cannabis. So this is something that was suppressed by the Nixon administration, and we are here to reveal these things to the people so they can make an educated decision about the cannabis plant.
How can people find out about this 1974 study that was suppressed?
Well, you can find it on the internet. It's the Virginia study, 1974, that cannabis shrinks tumors.
And it was sponsored by the DEA and the American Cancer Society.
It was actually funded by the federal government to try to find that it actually causes cancer, and they found that it actually shrinks tumors instead.
So this really changes the justification for a task force, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
So you're saying instead of kicking in the doors of criminals, they're kicking in the doors of healers.
Yes, absolutely.
Great. And look who else we have with us.
I say everything she said, and Google Run from the Cure, Rick Simpson, Run from the Cure, full version.
And then you can understand how cannabis cures cancer.
Right.
I know, right?
All right.
Like, I mean, why are we going around arresting nonviolent offenders? You know, I mean, you're not gonna. I don't really want to be taped.
You don't?
Not really.
Well, just say what you have to say off camera.
Well, I mean, like marijuana is not going to make a person violent. You know, it never has, and no one dies from using it. Like, there have been 0 deaths to date just from marijuana use alone. I mean, and then think of all the people that die from alcohol use. Yeah. And actually, it's been like, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the big alcohol industries were actually like supplying, you know.
But people should be free to do that. Prohibition against alcohol didn't work.
Well, yeah, but I mean, like, I'm saying like like alcohol might be also supplying people who are for like prohibition of marijuana with funds. Like, that's what I'm saying.
Right.
So it's, I don't know, it's one big mess.
It sure is. Well, we're here to reduce house cleaning if we can, and the first thing we have to do is educate people about the issue.
There's the bus, right?
Oh, there's the bus. Let's see what the bus thinks. Say, let the bus see this.
Oh, yeah.
Welcome to Woodstock.
Welcome to Woodstock.
Hopefully there's a few activists left in Woodstock still.
There's a few what?
I said hopefully there's a few activists left in Woodstock still.
Read my sign.
Read my sign.
Right. Urgent, urgent. Ulster Regional Gang Enforcement Narcotics Team is coming to town.
So here we are in lovely downtown Woodstock. It's a community where every once in a while this awful task force kicks in the doors of people who are actually dealing with something that's healing. So we have these 2 signs: support your local dealer, buy local, grow global, because it's been discovered and it's been known for a while, even though the studies were suppressed, that cannabis can cure cancer, and more people are proving it. Google Run from the Cure, full version.
Oh, that's the police station.
They asked for some samples.
Flowers, which is about 1 plant in full growth, growing the oil, making the oil, and then you take that pound of flowers and you soak it in like white lightning, also known as Everclear, and you soak it in that, and then you put it in a rice cooker, or you let it evaporate off the alcohol, and you'll have the oil. And then you take a little bit of that each day, and within a few months, your cancer will be all gone. Really? And that is a fact. Yes, it was proven in 1974 that cannabis shrinks tumors, and the government suppressed it. And so all these people that have been dying for cancer, and all these millions of dollars are being spent for cancer research, is for naught. It is just to hide this fact, it's to hide this discovery of the people that we can cure our own cancer. And 80 to 90% of the cancers will come.
So you're telling the people who want free samples to go where again, Joe Barton?
To the back of City Hall. That's where the police station is.
On Tinker Street?
Yeah.
For free samples. They got your 47 pounds off.
Right.
Yes.
Can we put you on camera for public access?
Yes.
Great. What were you saying about 1948?
Well, they've had this Peloton, or muscular dystrophy, since 1948. I guess, and they should have come to some kind of cure by now.
Right.
You know, just a curiosity thing, you know what I mean?
Well, this is referring to the fact that in 1974, the DEA and the American Cancer Society worked together to fund a study on cannabis. They were hoping to prove that it caused cancer, and they found that in huge amounts it cures cancer. So it's not about smoking, but getting high concentrations.
Nicely.
Yeah.
Okay.
So look into it. If you Google "Run from the Cure" full version,
Okay.
You'll learn all about it. "Run from the Cure" full version.
Nice talking to you.
You too. Thanks.
Thank you. God bless you. So did you say that it cures cancer? You didn't realize that it does that. And I said, yes.
know.
And I said, this is information that's been kept from the people.
Right.
And that our own legislature has been facilitating that by not allowing the truth to come out.
Right, by saying that it's something to just alleviate the pain and the bad side effects
Oh, the fact
of
that
chemo and
they've written a
radiation.
medical marijuana bill that limits it only to the seriously ill. What about the preventative aspects of this plant?
Right.
You can't prevent our cancer?
If I leave this with you, return it to me later.
Yeah.
Maybe she wants to.
We gotta go, yeah?
Hey, you forgot somebody.
Hey, Abigail, what's the date today?
The date today, are you testing my mental capability?
Yeah.
Okay, it is the 9th.
Saturday, October
Saturday,
9th.
October 9th.
And we're here in a lovely day in the fall in Woodstock.
Absolutely beautiful day.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Amen.
Where'd he go? Oh.
Capable of being cut at any moment by accident or miscalculation or by madness. The weapons of war must be abolished before they abolish us.
Operations in Iraq have ended. In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed.
With unlimited wealth also comes the potential for unlimited theft and extortion. Easy money. Here we have some of the sharpest minds on the face of the planet orchestrating the takeover of the world economy. The corporations, the land, the productivity value of the people. about the investment wealth that's built up within government, where government now owns it all by investment. The banks, the brokerage houses, the insurance companies, the Fortune 500 companies. Government is now bringing in more gross income than the population of the United States. When you look at the banks or the insurance companies, their number one investor, collective government. When you look at the total picture, government in 2007 brought in $14 trillion. The entire population of this country grossed, net after taxation, gross income of $5 trillion. The dollar is actually a zero-based currency. What that means is for every $1 that goes out into the population, it comes back in by taxation back into government. So 100% of dollars that go out is funneled back in through government, through taxation, little bit by little bit, one piece at a time. The population is being drained, their productivity drained by taxation. When you have property tax in a venue, you don't own your house. You're renting. Try not paying your rent on your property tax. You have a $5 million home, they'll come in and take it. In fact, they've set it up now where the mortgage companies and the banks are the tax collector. Your tax bill is included in with your mortgage. If you don't pay, they come in and foreclose on your house. No delay. This is extortion. And this documentary will be designed to show that based on what has developed in government, the total investment wealth amassed by government, there is no need whatsoever for taxation. None. Zero. We can phase out all taxation and make it disappear. One venue at a time. Any city, county, state, school district can be restructured under the same principle of operation to pay their ongoing budgetary obligations through what I call a TRF fund, tax retirement fund. Same as a pension fund, but instead of paying salary and benefits at retirement, it pays the ongoing budgetary obligations, so taxation is not needed. So you looked at the collective growth of government pension funds, local and federal combined from all, you're standing at about liquid assets of about $24 to $26 trillion in collective totals. On a TRF fund, it'll be designated that 60% of the investments take place in that local venue. Thus, an unlimited capital reinvestment in that local venue, zero unemployment rate, thriving businesses, no taxation. We now have more money for the public to spend, thus higher rates of return on the investments, thus providing more than ample revenue coming in for government to operate their normal budgetary basis. With TRF funds funding government, there is no real intent to grow, to overexpand in government. In fact, quite to the contrary, government now has the incentive to maintain within limitations, to downsize where appropriate, because the rates of return that are coming in are based on the prosperity of the population. The better the population is doing, the better the rates of return, more money coming in for government. Less money spent by government, the more there is for their own salaries, bonuses, and so forth. Gives them a very good incentive to downsize and not expand. So here you have the public and the financial cartels for the first time working together with the same common goal. The honest and ethical within government, who know taxation is wrong, and they've seen the unrestrained growth in government, the arrogance that is there within government, they're going to want to see the TRF funds also come into play. People kept asking me, well, who's taking the money? What accounts is it in? I said, it's the principle of operation. There's not one account. It's not who's directly stealing the money. It's where is that money invested? Any company can be made, a corporation, real estate project, period. That's where the power base. That's why you had the cooperation. That's why you had the silence. Syndicated media. 100% symbiotic partnership with government. Controlled education. 100% symbiotic relationship with government. Never mention, never word. Total void maintained in the population's comprehension. Would you give your 15-year-old child carte blanche to write their own allowance check each week? No way. Anyone I've asked that question, I would never do that. And that's exactly what we've done with our own government. We've given them carte blanche to write their own allowance check. whatever tax they can create, investment income from specialty investment funds, which the public doesn't even know exists. They would create this phenomenal income coming in from themselves by having carte blanche to do so. And they had to keep the public totally off in right field as they continue business in left field. If you poll the public, they think their elected officials or the managers within government, oh, they're stupid, they don't know what they're doing, they're real idiots. Wrong. The idiot would be someone who would say this. Here you have collective governments that are controlling trillions of dollars, taking half the productivity value of the entire population, and someone's going to call them stupid? I would call them extremely opportunistic. And we've allowed them to get away with it for the last 65 years. It's time we took back our country and created a structure that directly benefited we the people. The annual financial report or comprehensive annual financial report for government is their holy grail of accounting. Never talked about, never mentioned, never discussed, because it showed the gross income, the investment wealth that was building, and showed the 1/3, as of 2000, 1/3 tax income that came in. Now, if you looked at a budget report, it looked like 100% was coming in from tax income, because that's what's shown on the budget report. Everything else was shown on the annual financial report. And this was intentional on government's part, because they knew if that void was filled and the comprehension was being gained by the public as to the growth and scope and size of government, the population would have stopped it decades ago. So, never a mention, never a peep, never a word. When you have a government that develops into this type of extortion of revenue, manipulation of revenue, non-disclosure, I have to qualify that as organized crime. Government is breaking the law through their massive non-disclosure by intentionally creating a vacuum and a void on their collective ownership. If a public corporation did that, all of the directors would be sitting in San Quentin after a 40-count SEC indictment. Here, city level, county level, state level, total vacuum, total silence, not a mention, not a peep, not a word. No comprehension, even disgust. Total refusal of our elected officials to even mention collective totals, total wealth, total investments. 65 years. It's easy to grease the skids and transfer the wealth and cut a deal here, cut a deal there, if no one even knows the money is there in the first place. That's why government, not a peep, not a mention, not a sound. Silence is golden was government's rule over the last 65, 70 years. Talk about Janet Jackson or this, that, or the other thing over here and something non-consequential. And over here, let's see, in the 2008, government takes over $600 trillion in derivatives. They control the marketplace, cause the collapse, suck $15, $20 trillion out of the world economy into their investment fund accounts. On the other side of the trade, not a peep, not a mention. Silence is golden, as the public is masterfully entertained. Not to look, not even to comprehend, to think about it. That makes it very easy for the corruption. With the TRF fund application, we can revert the ownership back into the hands of the population, benefit the financial cartels, benefit government, benefit ourselves, creating a productivity through capital reinvestment of unequal proportions that will drive the economy for the next 1,000 years. And we will maintain our wealth and allow our wealth to build.
Louis O. Kelso. Mr. Kelso is, in the minds of many, the economist. He's defining a new economics that has incredible implications in terms of the American, Western, and world economies. And Louis Kelso, once again, welcome very, very much to Conversations Indeed.
Pleasure to be here, Harold.
We've entitled the program The Economics of Reality, and you had entitled your book, Two-Factor Theory, The Economics of Reality.
What it does, Harold, is to highlight the fact that in a very real and practical sense, economics as a valid discipline hasn't begun yet. Well, believe it or not, it is the concept of economists, as I say, past and present, that there's only one way to legitimately earn income. We simply say there are two. There is no resemblance between one-factor economics and the economics of reality, which I will call two-factor economics.
Mm-hmm.
The conventional wisdom, that scoffing term for people who pretend to be wise and are wrong, holds that the only legitimate way for individuals to acquire income is through the employment of their labor power, the powers of their bodies and mind. It's our position that not only can one earn income that way, it's our position that one can and does earn income through his privately owned capital. Land, structures, machines, certain intangibles that are given by law or custom. Since most of the assets in the American economy are owned by corporations, the form that that ownership of capital takes is the ownership of stock. The common law defines property in producer goods as a bundle of rights, including the right to possess, to use, to lease, to subdivide, even to destroy if you want to. Today, the typical owner, the stockholder, on the average, receives about 1/12 of the income that the assets that he beneficially owns produces. That when we speak of the income earning power of capital, we're talking about something that is 12 times greater than it appears.
Oh, right. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
12 times as powerful. To say it another way, the income that a $500,000 capital estate would earn for you under that attenuated property arrangement, you could receive from a mere $47,000 investment if you got what it really produced.
Right.
Ownership of the second factor of production. Because what I've done is to say the ownership of capital by an individual is a way of earning income. If he got the wages of his capital fully, would be a full-fledged capital worker. We're talking about ways in which people, human beings, citizens, as defined in the United States Constitution, ways in which citizens engage or can engage in production.
Yes.
We were an economic democracy in 1776 when we took the first steps into political democracy. Economic power, on the other hand, is nothing more nor less than the power to produce goods and services. That is economic power. So that in 1776, everyone had economic power because labor was the main source and everyone was born with it. Economic power was democratically diffused throughout the society. But if the input of capital workers were measured in comparison to the input of labor workers, we would find that between 1776 and 1983, for example, that the two forms of input, labor workers versus capital workers, have roughly changed places.
Switched, yeah.
Capital workers provide at least 90% of the input and 10% from labor. Now, look at the mess we've gotten into.
That's right.
Look at the mess we've gotten into. If this is accurate, and so help me, Hannah, it's accurate, we have the great bulk of the people, 95% of them, providing a mere 10% of the productive input. And you have a mere 5% of the people who own all the productive capital providing 90% of the productive input. In 1930, and particularly beginning in 1932, we embarked on a program which was later called the War on Poverty, but this is what Roosevelt was really talking about. A war on poverty, which meant a war on the effects of poverty, not on poverty, war on the effects of poverty. In 1946, we officially adopted the one-factor economic policy. Congress got together and said, we want to leave no doubt about this subject. There is only one way to earn income. Employment Act of 1946. Now, pursuant to the War on Poverty and to the Employment Act of 1946, and using the tools of coercive trickle-down, those are primarily implemented by labor under the policy of the National Labor Relations Act and all the other labor apparatus, under which labor simply makes an assault on the market value of labor power. They demand more and more pay for the same work.
Or less.
Or what's worse, they demand more and more pay for less work. So we've rigged the price of labor. We have used the coercive power of taxation to rip income away from people who earn it. We're trying to hide the fact that when the few produce for the many become parasites. As the most momentous implications under the American Constitution that you can imagine. You can't talk about the right of citizens to earn income in the way in which goods and services are actually produced, or through the tools that they're actually produced today, if you don't recognize that capital workers earn income at all. The fact of the matter is they're operating on a set of facts that is unreal. It has no relation to the world. The conventional wisdom holds that a capital instrument acts essentially like a catalytic agent.
Yes, right.
A catalytic agent, or some kind of a magic device. You put the capital down in the vicinity of the workers, and somehow or other, invisible signals go back and forth between those things, and it raises the productivity of the workers who work in the vicinity of it but don't own it.
Right.
Now, of course, all this is simply fraud done with statistics. What they do is measure the output caused by two input factors and attribute it to the wrong one. And why do they do that? Because they want an excuse and a justification to constantly pay labor more and more for less and less, instead of enabling people to become literally and actually productive in the way in which goods and services is produced. Nobody likes to be a host and earning income, have it taken away from him, to support strangers. I mean, to someone you love, that's another matter, but that's not what the question is. And no red-blooded American wants to be a parasite in any sense of the word. And if he knew his constitutional rights, he would like it even less, because the Constitution tells him, you've got a right to be productive. The right to life with liberty, which is proclaimed by the prologue to the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and by the Constitution itself. The right to life with liberty is meaningless if it doesn't mean you are entitled to the power to earn. Not only are there two ways to earn income, but that the whole thrust of science is to make the capital worker endlessly and progressively more productive, because capital takes the place of labor. Or if it doesn't take the place of it, it at least produces more. The system is totally out of control in that by endlessly building ownership into those who can't use it. We sterilize it on the one hand, and we deprive the system of the tools that it has to have to live. Let's take the case of housing. There was no moment in the history of the world prior to this one when we had the massive capability of building houses of the highest quality, the greatest beauty, the greatest durability, and the lowest cost to right now. And yet,
Look at the reality.
The great bulk of people who once could have had houses can't have them anymore.
Why?
For the very simple reason that coerced trickle-down economics packs the wage base with welfare and inflates the prices, and relying on labor input, even though it's jiggered, in other words, even though it's enormously exaggerated, it still isn't enough to take what is produced primarily by capital off the market. Those who have only their labor power and its precarious value held up by this coercive rigging, and who desperately need capital ownership to enable them to be capital workers as well as labor workers, can't do it. So on the one hand, we've pushed the price of housing through the ceiling. On the other hand, we put the income in people who don't already have too many houses. Why did they want more and more pay for the same work or less work? Perfectly simple. The system doesn't give them access to capital ownership. In a world in which technology is shifting the burden of production off labor off labor workers onto capital workers, every man needs to have access to capital ownership so that he can buy capital and pay for it out of what the capital produces. I believe nature intended us to shift the burden of production off labor workers onto capital workers. The more difficult it becomes to earn a living, the more people focus on it.
Yes, right.
And that's natural. If the U.S. economy continues to encourage and promote technological advance, which it must, and continues to distribute the resulting income, see which under Say's law goes to those who earn it, those who produce, we would ravage our currency with inflation, and we would turn over our markets to foreigners. Not because the foreigners are necessarily smarter than we are, but because they are, in general, about 10 or 15 years behind us on the road going in the wrong direction. What needs to be adjusted is the opportunity to produce, not the redistribution of income after it's produced. By the way, Aesop, I think, Aesop's fables. Aesop has that law worked out better than I think anyone else. Aesop said it all when he said, "You can give meat to a tiger, but you can't take it away from him." Now that's why redistribution doesn't work in the American economy. Why finance tends to make the rich ever richer and to keep the poor. And I define anyone without a viable capital estate as poor. We found out, but everyone knows this once you examine it, it just hadn't been examined, that credit to buy capital, the thing Kuznets was talking about, as the essence of finance, credit to buy capital is made available to only to people who already own capital.
Who don't need it.
Relatively speaking, who don't need it.
Right.
And it is clinically denied with a snarl and a glance down the bridge of some banker's nose to those who need it. You can't imagine a more perverse arrangement. Capital formation takes place on the logic of self-financing. That is to say, people buy capital instruments with the expectation that they will pay for themselves.
They'd better. It'd be a bad business investment if they didn't.
Well, from the very beginning, man's tool making would have lowered his standard of living. And frankly, as you know, he was not able to afford it. He was living like an animal to begin with.
Right out of the...
Self-financement, or auto-financement, as the Germans call it, is the logic of capital acquisition. You buy capital if you think it will pay for itself in a reasonable period of time in operation, and the rule of thumb in general in business, except in the throes of a severe depression, which we're in and which we will never escape from until we change the economic policy, was 3 to 5 years. It's probably longer than that, more like 5 to 7 or 8 years today. Now, there is nevertheless a risk that it might not pay for itself, called the feasibility risk. In the whole of business, the handling of risk is done by commercial insurance. And this is the normal way. Ask any insurance man, he'll tell you we'd still be in the Stone Age if it weren't for commercial insurance.
Right, yeah.
Because you couldn't build anything very valuable.
Couldn't yeah, right.
and take the risk that one wipe out and you're finished forever.
Right, you spread that out, right.
Yeah, spread over a wide base. But the most important business risk of all, because it determines whether labor workers can become capital workers in an industrialized society. In other words, it depends upon whether the constitutional rights of man to his life with liberty are going to be satisfied or not. That risk, that vital, horribly important risk, we have only used self-insurance. In other words, you start a new business, costs $1 million, a banker likes it, he likes the studies and all, he says, I'll finance it. He's not telling you he'll loan you $1 million. He's telling you he'll loan you 2/3 of $1 million, or maybe 3/4. The rest is self-insurance. Self-insurance is a crude, primitive, obsolete way of insuring the business risk of feasibility.
Yeah, and then with that backed up with collateralization, which even, it'll just...
Well, that is a form of self-insurance, collateralization, mortgages and what have you. Now, what's needed, obviously, is a reasonably modern way of risk management in finance. The risk needs to be commercially insured or broadly insured so that it doesn't constantly build capital ownership into the already rich where it is sterilized and is no use to the consumer economy and denies it to the poor who must firstly suffer. God knows the horror that this kind of stupid finance has inflicted on the world. It is so immeasurable that it's almost useless to talk about.
Particularly frustrating, you can see alternatives that
yes, of
can
course.
be put in place as you worked out. Yeah.
Now, the ESOP, the Employee Stock Ownership Plan, was the first tool that I invented. I actually invented it before the publication of the Capitalist Manifesto, simply because I'm revolted by the thought of putting forward an idea that can't be implemented. I think as a form of chicanery. The ESOP is a device, and there are hundreds and hundreds of them. There are actually thousands of things called ESOPs, but most of them are counterfeits. But there are a good many real ESOP, real financing devices that enable them, that give employees access to credit so that they can buy the employer's stock, pay for it out of the assets that underlie that stock, and after it's paid for, earn it, collect the wages of it, accumulate it in a tax haven until they retire, and where used efficiently and intensively, when they retire from being labor workers, they continue to be capital workers, and they can go on to their dying day totally self-sufficient. I'm speaking of the ideal case now, because we've got to use it more intensively than we do.
Yes, right.
But the object of the game is really lifetime employment. That's what the thing is all about. From the time that you leave your family, get your education, you should begin to be, and thereafter forever be until your dying day, self-sufficient, needing no redistribution, no food stamps, no welfare, no charity, no social security, no pensions, no profit sharing, none of that stuff, which is largely designed to promote the stock market. They churn around and gamble in second-hand securities that have very little value to the individual because their yield is 5 or 6%, always below the rate of inflation, except when you're trying to control inflation with a severe depression, how long
as they increasingly seem to do.
Yeah, how long the American people are going to stand still for that, I think is one of the more interesting speculations.
So we could begin to build an economic democracy to go along with the avowed and in real terms political democracy that we have. We need to have them working in tandem in order to have the country move into a really appropriate new kind of future that we can see.
About a year ago, I gave some testimony before Senator Mark Hatfield's Senate Appropriations Committee. The title of it was The Right to be Productive.
Yes.
And what that does is marshal the constitutional law case for access to capital ownership. And of course, at the moment, the ESOP is the best way to do it. There are 7 other techniques built on the same logic. Some of them have been partially legislatively implemented. Most haven't. But what's needed, of course, is simply for Congress to say, let's abandon the outmoded and false economic policy that there's only one way to earn an income. Now, I testified very extensively before the Joint Economic Committee back in 1975 when Hubert Humphrey was chairman.
Yes.
And at the conclusion of that testimony, and in the annual report of the Joint Economic Committee, which comes out with the President's Economic Report in January of each year. In the Joint Economic Committee report in January of 1976, the committee recommended to the Congress that they change the economic policy to a 2-factor policy.
Marvelous. I mean,
would be marvelous, except Congress never paid any attention.
But it has been taken on and seen by people who can see the vision and the logic and the appropriateness of that, that it might be that we could consider collectively as a society a major policy direction or a major policy shift that would allow us to meet some of the major economic problems individually, in an industrial corporate sense, and collectively, and that the kernel of that would be the economics 2-factor theory or the economics of reality that you've been putting forward.
The reason economics doesn't work is that it starts from the wrong facts. From there on, it is terribly easy to cure it. About a month ago, some of the world's most highly respected economists met on David Rockefeller's estate up in New York, Pocantico. And they shook their heads and they said, none of the economic theories around the world are working. None. We must set out to find out why. And the Nobel Foundation and the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, or one of the Rockefeller Foundations, indicated that they would back it. And now these fine gentlemen are going to set off on a great economic boondoggle, and whatever the appropriated funds are, they won't find the answer before they've used those. But they're looking for that other little fact.
Well, isn't it good that they're doing that? That there's initiative being taken toward the idea of trying to understand in a broad...
I think it's kind of pitiful that you have to do it. I did it 20 years ago.
Right,
what the hell are they talking about?
Why don't they just call you in and put you...
or why doesn't somebody step up and say, here, gentlemen, is the answer.
Right.
Give me half the $3 million, you take the rest, and we'll save all that boring reading and stuff.
Yeah, right. Well, it is encouraging that it is encouraging, in fact, that if we look at that, as we look through the conundrums that are confronting us all, as we look at these, that there are solutions, given a certain analysis, given a certain perspective.
It's more than that. These solutions are working.
They're working now.
We're buying some of the very large corporations in the U.S. economy for their employees.
Yeah, it's beginning to happen right now without a big policy statement on the part of Congress. There could be a change of the Full Employment or the Employment Act of 1946. You at one time had thought a Production Act, Full Production Act of
yes. Well, you can call it anything you want.
Yeah.
What it needs is a recognition that We should deliberately begin to broaden the capital ownership base. We should do it consistently with the laws of property, with the constitutional safeguards, but not just the constitutional safeguards of property, but also the constitutional safeguards of the rights of man. We talk about human rights. The right to be productive is the #1 human right. If there's one more important than that, is simply the right not to be killed.
Yeah, right.
On the spot.
Yeah, that's right. And that we could have that kind of a direction toward which we're going is one, and despite the fact that these, let's say in a certain sense, legislative initiatives to change the basic policy structure, to have a generally accepted notion that there could be a dispersal of income, access to credit in order to purchase capital instruments that will pay for themselves, applying the business logic finance to the general citizenry as a method of income distribution, which could also provide for greater capital formation.
I've worked out the details.
You've got the details
and
worked out.
It's terribly simple.
Right. Yeah.
Simply use the Federal Reserve Bank to monetize each transaction determined by the same expertise that determines it today. Firstly, management, secondly, banks. That it's feasible, but with no risk in the Federal Reserve Bank at all. All they do is monetize the transaction. As our last diagram there indicates, the first layer of risk would be taken by the commercial insurers, but to make certain that they feel safe and comfortable, and that they will be backed up, there needs to be one new institution, the Capital Diffusion Reinsurance Corporation, a government corporation that insurance companies could lay off part or all the risk if they want to. And of course, when you lay off risk, you lay off premiums, so you don't do that unless you think you can't make money at it. I guess the most momentous question you can ask about that risk is, why would the federal government do a thing like that? I mean, why would it step up and say, well, these enterprises that have been determined to be feasible, if they aren't feasible, why should Uncle insure them? The answer is Uncle insures them anyway. In the last half century has always insured them. Not in that form. If a business fails and people are unemployed and hungry, government picks them up. And government is expected to pick them up. There's no doubt about that.
Why don't we...
The difference is that today government does it without any assurance that the risks to individuals are locked into, rigidly and contractually locked into an expansion of production. As this diagram shows, with each financing, it's determined to be feasible and it's determined to be self-liquidating. Except for a little risk of feasibility. Insurers have calculated that risk. If it's very big, it will be said to be not feasible and it won't be financed. Well, hell, that goes on every day anyway.
And this would be, in a certain sense, I'm terribly sorry, we're running short on time here, but this would be, in a certain sense, a final assurance to the overall system and the forward movement of the production of the economy as we begin to move ahead, underpinning these approaches and institutional structurings that you've talked of. Is entirely keeping that a Congress or a governmental legislative organization might well do that.
It's simply providing the commercial insurance of something that has been self-insured, and that's its evil.
Yeah, right. Well,
What it does for the third world, you can see, is to eliminate the necessity for savings financing. They don't have to look abroad for savings.
Okay, that's right. Now
that's perhaps the most critical thing at the moment.
Well, that's going to have to wait for another program. I'm totally sorry, we're running right out of time. But may I just really say thank you again, Louis. It's been a great pleasure being with you. It's been a pleasure for you in the cable audience to have had the perceptions of Louis Kelso, author of an economic system of incredible import to the Western world economy. Thanks again very, very much for participating. We'll invite you to tune in again next week. I'm sorry, we're running right out of time. That's it for this week. And once again, Louis, thank you very, very much indeed for everything.
Let's take the case of housing. There was no moment in the history of the world prior to this one when we had the massive capability of building houses of the highest quality, the greatest beauty, the greatest durability, and the lowest cost. And yet, great bulk of people who once could have had houses can't have them anymore.